My name is Brett Razigan. I'm the planning manager with the County Economic Development Department. The Brownfield session we think is going to be a very good one. We have three very knowledgeable speakers with us today. One Stop Ready. How many have been to One Stop Ready workshop before? Many of you I know, yep. We started this in 2013 as an initiative to work and partner with communities that are looking to be very proactive in their economic development activities. We emphasize high quality customer service, benchmarking, self-evaluation, and really sharing information among all of you, the county and the state. This is our fourth workshop of the year. Our first one was ZBA training back in January. We had about 140 people in the room here. It was packed. We had CIP training in March. July was our investors' perspective. We had representatives from Jonah Development Corporation, Search Optics in Ferndale, and United Shore in Pontiac. And they gave a really good feedback to local communities on what they look for in communities when they're investing. And Ferndale and Pontiac got really high marks from United Shore and Search Optics for their work. Today's our Brownfield workshop. This is one that was identified last year. We surveyed the communities in Brownfield. It was an important topic that they wanted more information on. And our next and last workshop of the year will be on November 7th, our community showcase. And many of the current One Stop Ready communities have been involved with this. What we do is we invite developers, investors, brokers, to come to a morning meeting, and we profile investment opportunities from all of our communities. We typically have about 60 developers and brokers attend. It's a chance for a community to showcase properties that they want to see some investment activity on. It's an opportunity for the elected officials and economic development directors to meet face-to-face with these various developers. It's a great opportunity. We have room for about 30 booths. It's across the street at the Oakland Intermediate Schools District. We have room for about 30 booths, and I think we have 16, 17, Ryan signed up so far. If we haven't reached out to you yet, we will be. Ryan Dividak, who manages the program, is contacting all the communities to see if they're interested in a booth at the showcase. Our topic today is brownfields, and we have three speakers. Brad Hansen is our first speaker. Brad is the Senior Business Development Rep with the County Economic Development Office. He manages our Brownfield initiative, and that includes two components. We have a County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and then also an EPA-funded Brownfield grant program. Dan Goff from ME Department of Environmental Quality covers the Brownfield program for Macomb, Oakland, and St. Clair counties. Dominic Romano is part of MEDC's Community Assistance Team, and Dominic covers Region 10 except for the city of Detroit. So Bradley, I think you're up first.
Applause, thanks. Ask a couple questions to start this off. How many people in here are familiar with brownfields or had brownfield experience? By show of hands. So quite a few. Of those, if you're a community, do you have your own BRA? So just a number of you. Okay, well, the Brownfield program is unique. I was fortunate enough, I started off as an intern 17 years ago in Fulton County, and I got thrown on the Brownfield program. So it's new and exciting for me, so I was loving it. The thing about the Brownfield program, it's no project is the same. Each project is different. You'll run into it. You'll run into projects that are not going to go anywhere. That's just the nature of the beast. But when they do go forward, it's a great benefit for your community. Cleans up land, gets it using existing infrastructure, and creates jobs and more tax base for your community. So start off with, what is a brownfield? It's any property where real or perceived contamination or environmental conditions cause a barrier for full use. So I'm going to gloss some of this over because Dominic and Dan are going to go in more depth in their presentation. But some of the following are eligible properties for brownfield facility. That's where that's actually contaminated parcel of land. So that's where environmental conditions in the ground are in excess of the state requirements. In addition to that, adjacent or contiguous to the subject property. So if you have a developer has a couple parcels of land and one is contaminated, you can piece those properties together as long as they're contiguous or adjacent, and put in a brownfield plan for TIF benefits, and we'll go into that a little bit later. And also land-based property. So if you have any land-based properties in your community, it'd also be qualified for a brownfield. In addition to those, there are some other properties that would qualify for a brownfield, those being functionally obsolete properties, blighted, or historic resource. For functionally obsolescence, you need level 3 or 4 assessor to determine that that property is functionally obsolete, and at that point it would become a brownfield. Blighted, you basically just need a letter from your city saying that the property is blighted and it'd be qualified for a brownfield. And the last one that was recently added is historic resource. So if you have any historic resource buildings in your community, that would also qualify as a brownfield. And unfortunately, I don't remember the exact definition of what historic resource qualifies as. I don't know if either of you gentlemen, they can go on much later if you have questions. The Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. This is the component where you get the benefit from the community. You can capture TIF. So under the Brownfield Redevelopment Act, a municipality may create a Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, or BRA, to develop and implement brownfield projects. It's a resource to capture tax increment financing, which we'll go into in much greater detail if you're not familiar with TIF. Now, a number of you said you have your own BRAs. The county is here, we have our own BRA, and we're here to help the communities that don't have their own BRA, but have brownfield projects. We will take over the project as long as we have a release from the local city council or township board, and we'll also need a concurrent resolution from the city or township saying, yeah, we know about this project and we want to see this project go forward. So if the county BRA is used, we just need 2 resolutions from the local city or board in order to move forward with the project. Tax increment financing. This is what we're going to, Dominic and Dan are going to go over in more great detail. They actually have a game set up for you guys, so have fun with that. But tax increment financing is just the capture of increased taxes on the property. So whatever development is, the increase of the value of the land is eligible to be captured and reimbursed back to the developer over a set number of years in a brownfield plan to make them whole for cleaning up the property. One key component of that is TIF. You're probably thinking, well, that's it could be a big number. How do we know that they actually spent the money? Well, with the brownfield authorities, we require only money that's been spent. So we require invoices and receipts of paid for the eligible activities. So we only reimburse what's actually been spent by the developer. And in the case of the our Oakland County's BRA, we do an internal check, but we also send out to a third party to review the invoices and receipts to make sure everything is okay, what they're claiming they spent on, and if it's in the brownfield plan and the 381 work plan, to make sure that everything is legitimate. If you are going for, there's 2 components of a brownfield plan. There's one that's local only, where that'll capture all the taxing mills except for the school's state taxes. So once it gets through our BRA process and our board of commissioner process, you're okay for just collecting local only taxes. Again, that's everything but the school and state taxes. If you have a development that's looking for state school tax as well, which basically just speeds up the payback period for the developer, you put together what is called a 381 work plan, and you, depending on the circumstances on the property, you will turn it into both a DEQ and MEDC. Sometimes just DEQ, just only the DEQ, or vice versa, just the MEDC. But it goes through their process to get state school taxes approved. So that adds a little bit more time, but they've done a good job recently as far as trying to streamline the process and getting things approved quickly. In a brownfield plan, there's a 30-year payback per state statute, where you have 30 years to get paid back. The developer has to get paid back. So with the tax increment financing, It could take, 30 years. I've seen projects as little as 2 years, depending on how much increased value of the property after the development is how fast the property gets, or the developer gets paid back for their eligible activities. But they have 30 years, and honestly, they have 35 years. In the first 5 years, they don't have any movement on the site. You can delay it and go up to 35 years. Some miscellaneous facts that can go into the Brownfield Authority. Interest on projects may be reimbursed to the developer, not to exceed 5%. Oakland County's BRA is maybe a little unique. I'm not sure how other BRAs are around the state or the county, but we have not historically approved interest for our Brownfield plans. Only in one unique circumstance we did approve interest for a Brownfield plan. But I know other communities around the state, they do allow developers to capture interest as part of eligible activity for being reimbursed. In a Brownfield plan, there's a 15% contingency. So if there's any overrun, you have 15% of the number to go into to get reimbursed. That's very beneficial because, like I said, every Brownfield project is different. So you really don't know until you get in the ground what you're seeing. Dan was sharing a story with me earlier about a project he's working on, that they got in the ground and they're experienced more than they bargained for, so they're having to do more cleanup. So that's where that 15% contingency kicks in. BRAs may capture administrative costs in revolving loan fund. This is something the county takes advantage of. It's not meant to make a community rich by any means, but administrative costs just helps pay for the person actually administrating the projects, keeping track of the Brownfield plan itself, the receipts coming in, the actual checks coming in to reimburse the developer. There's somebody who has to track that at all times. The revolving loan fund. This is very beneficial for communities. Basically, at the end of a Brownfield plan, you can capture a set amount of money to put into a revolving loan fund to help future Brownfield projects within your community. So that's very beneficial. I know a number of communities have RLF and they've already used it in some of their projects, so they're seeing great benefit from it already. I know City of Troy and City of Ferndale, I know for sure have used it. If the property is already in a TIFA or a DDA or any sort of TIFA district, there needs to be an interlocal agreement or removal of that property in order for a Brownfield plan to go forward. That's because whatever DDA or TIFA, whatever TIFA district it's in first, they have the first claim to the property, and the Brownfield would have the second claim. So the first TIFA district is basically capturing everything. That's where the interlocal agreement comes into effect, where you can divvy up that money in interlocal, or some communities will just opt to move that property from the TIFA district. And of course, it goes without saying, staff is of vital importance for a Brownfield program. There's a lot of things to keep track of. Brownfield plans and eligible activities. I'm going to go over this pretty quickly because Dan and Dominic are going to talk in more great detail about this. But as far as what developers can be reimbursed for as far as on a Brownfield site, you're looking at baseline environmental activities, determine if the property is contaminated or a facility or not, sampling analysis, due care activities, investigation to define the contamination as far as where it is on the property, additional response activity, lead and asbestos, and you can see everything up here. And like I said, Dan and Dominic will talk about this in more great detail, so I don't want to steal any of their thunder. So move on to the.
Go ahead.
Other eligible activities in a qualified local government or unit or a core community would be infrastructure improvements that directly benefit eligible property, demolition, lead and asbestos, and site preparation. Those are in addition to the previous slide. Benefits of Brownfield redevelopment. There's three main points that I look at. It's clean up environmental conditions and protected environmental assets. That's huge. You get to reuse the existing infrastructure, and you have urban revitalization, which is key. You'll see a lot of properties that are, you wonder why they're vacant. A lot of it has to do with brownfield and what might be in the ground. So the brownfield program helps those properties get them back to full use. And obviously it creates new jobs and taxes for your community. Environmental assessments. This is a great program through the US EPA. We've been fortunate to have a US EPA grant for the past 15, 16 years to do assessments. And basically what our assessments do, they determine if the property is a facility or contaminated or not. So phase one goes into the history of the actual site itself and its neighbors to see if there's any concern historically, if it was contaminated, or there any reason to believe that something could have caused contamination on this site. If there is a reason to believe that there's possibility of contamination in the ground, it will trigger a phase two. Phase two report actually gets into the ground, samples the soil and samples the groundwater. This determines what exactly is in the ground, what amounts it's in, and what needs to be done to clean it up. The last thing, and every time I talk to a developer who doesn't want to do their BEA, I encourage them to do their environmental assessment activities, because once you file the BEA with the state, it's basically their liability protection in the future. So basically you take the information from phase one and phase two, you put together a BEA, you turn it into a state, and that basically helps the purchaser if there's any cleanup that needs to be done in the future. They have a BEA that shows what was on the site before, what they're doing, and how they aren't responsible for the contamination that's in the ground. So I mentioned a few minutes ago about our US EPA assessment grants. We have these assessment grants since 2001 in order to help developers in cities, in village and townships, to perform phase one, phase two, lead and asbestos work, BEAs, do care plans. We have this money to help them with their bottom line, because a lot of some of these tests can cost a lot of money, especially when you get into phase two. You'd be talking up to $20,000 to $30,000, if not more, depending on the size and scope of your project. So since 2001, you can see the numbers up here. We were $250,000. We awarded to 18 projects, and as you will see that as time goes on, we've funded more projects with more money. 2005, $400,000 grant. We funded 22 projects. In 2009. The US EPA came out with a consortium grant, which went up to $1 million. And at that point, we decided to create a consortium, which we have 2 members, at least maybe 3 members in our crowd. We have, so our consortium consists of Farmington Hills, Ferndale, Hazel Park, Madison Heights, Pontiac, and Southfield, along with Oakland County. Together, we combined to the Oakland County Brownfield Consortium. We got awarded $1 million. Each one of our partner communities were set aside a certain amount of money for their own within their own personal boundaries. And the rest of the money went to Oakland County as a whole. So any project outside those communities were also eligible through Oakland County's portion of the money. And so in 2009, we rewarded $1 million. We used it on 134 projects in a proposed investment of $298 million and a proposed job creation of 1,800 jobs through that 2009 grant cycle. In 2013, the US EPA reduced the $1 million grant to $600,000, but we still used the project on the money on 103 projects, with an overall investment, proposed overall investment of $633 million, with 2,800 full-time jobs and 1,100 part-time jobs created. So it's a great benefit to these communities. In 2016, we're working on currently the 2016 grant cycle. We were awarded another $600,000. So far, an overall investment of $631 million on projects that we helped fund, with a proposed creation of 1,600 jobs full-time and 400 part-time jobs. And I'm going to pick on a couple of our consortium members so they can give us an example of how they use this money. I'll start with Shelley since she raised her hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Shelley Freeman. I'm with the City of Southfield. I'm with the city of Southfield. Prior to us being in the consortium with Oakland County, the city had applied for our own grant, and we were able to spend the money, but it was so much more efficient, and Brad did such an amazing job of organizing the consortium and managing the funds. It was definitely to our advantage to be part of the consortium rather than going on our own. So we really appreciated being part of that group. But these dollars really help prime the pump for development. And we have a lot of different people that are looking to purchase properties at different times. And there's not a lot of incentives that you can offer people. So being able to help with their initial purchase has been really a good fit for us, to give the business owner, the potential owner, just a little something to encourage them to move into our city. And then we have our own Brownfield authority, so if there is some sort of contamination or future need, we can wrap that right into our own Brownfield project. So we really appreciate being part of the consortium, and it's a great benefit for us.
Linda, you concur?
I concur.
Nothing else to add?
Well, no, it's by far the best grant. I mean, you have virtually no red tape in there. So we also use it primarily for marketing purposes to attract large industrial businesses. And it really essentially serves as a small, helps with their closing costs. Everyone has to do a phase 1 and phase, what we hope you don't have to go into phase 2. That's where it really jumps up in cost, but my businesses love it. Brad, he handles all of the paperwork to the EPA. He handles all of the, behind the scenes, paperwork stuff. And really, we have the fun job of just really, spending the money. He's our bank account, basically, and it's virtually no red tape. We can get approval in a matter of an hour, not even. We have a developer comes in, we have our pre-development meeting, discuss, taking advantage of this grant, and I can send out an email both to my city manager and my director, get approval, and ship it right to Brad, and they're approved. And the hardest part is they have to pick an environmental firm as part of the RFP, and I think we got 3 consultants. They're big name.
Correct.
consultants.
We have 3 pre-approved consultants that we use. We use AKT, ASTI, and PM as the 3 pre-approved consultants that need to do the work. And I guess to go off Linda's comments, yeah, we move quickly, the cities can move quickly, Oakland County move quickly, but sometimes we run into a little bit of hiccup because we have to get the project qualified through the US EPA. So we have to send the project to the US EPA and get them approved of it. So that could add, up to 10 days really, but generally it moves pretty quickly.
And it's 100% true grant, and you don't hear about that anymore. It is no money out of the developer's pocket. In fact, the consultant, if they were to go with PM Environmental, they submit the paperwork to Oakland County. So there is no reimbursement back to the developer even. So it is by far, I know as any EDC is by far our favorite grant.
And the county handles all of the reporting to
Correct.
the EPA, so there's
You're welcome.
Yes.
virtually no responsibility on
That's
our
why we
part.
joined that consortium. County does all the work.
Thank you, ladies. Other US EPA grants, actually with the new legislation that was just signed earlier this year, actually the Brownfield program, which we were scared that was being threatened to be chopped by the current administration, but actually increased funding for the project eventually. So site-specific cleanup grants, they were actually previously capped at $200,000. They actually went up in the new budget cycle to $500,000. That's basically if you have a problem project in your community, you can apply to the US EPA and get up to $500,000 to clean up the site. I personally have never applied for this because the county doesn't own any land besides our tax reverted, and we want to go down that avenue, I believe. But it could be a great benefit, obviously, if you have a troublesome property in your community. Another one is a revolving loan fund, worth up to $1 million to establish a revolving loan fund to help brownfield projects. loan out money to potential projects or developers who are interested in cleaning up and redeveloping contaminated land. I just have a reference sheet here, and I believe it might be in a printout, maybe not. Ryan, do we?
Yes, it's in the printout.
Okay, so there's a reference sheet in there. One thing before I turn over to Dominic and Dan, I mentioned Oakland County has our own BRA, and we help communities that don't have their own BRA. I'm here, call me, I'll help you, whatever way I can. I'll come out to your, council and help educate. BRA, sometimes BRA boards aren't exactly the most knowledgeable on the Brownfield Authority. They just got appointed to the position, so if that's the case, you need some education, or you just need to call sounding board advice, just feel free to give me a call. I got business cards up here. Just come out and grab one, or I can pass them out. But feel free to give me a call if you have any question whatsoever of the Brownfield program, or anything Oakland County can do to try to help in your projects. Please feel free to give me a call. At that point, I will turn it over to you first, Dan Goff from the MDQ.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming in. So just to kind of echo what Brad just said, if you can take one thing away from today, it's to grab our business cards and give us a call whenever you have a question. Because anything that we say today, if you don't remember it, we'll be able to help you out as we move forward. So today we'll go over kind of a lot of what Brad just talked about, but in greater detail. Talk about eligible properties, activities, what tax increment financing is. If you don't know what TIF is, you're in luck. We have 3 slides and a game. We'll try to explain it so so everybody understands. Obviously, Brad went over the abilities of a Brownfield Authority, but we'll talk about, I think something that all of you want to hear about is what kind of incentives and funding both of our organizations have. Other opportunities out there, like Brad just mentioned with EPA. And we'll go over a couple videos to show you some projects that we've done in the state, and one project in particular that we thought was pretty interesting that might give you some ideas about projects of your own. So as Brad mentioned, what is a brownfield? It's a property that's either known to be contaminated or suspected to be contaminated based upon the prior use of that property. So if you see a site that used to be a gas station, but you don't have any information, my guess is that it's probably a brownfield. There's probably some contamination there. Old dry cleaners are big former brownfields as well. Not a lot of people understand that. But if it used to be a dry cleaner, chances are it's contaminated. So we have 3 different ways we describe eligible properties. So the first is a facility, and that's a piece of property that's actually known to be contaminated. There's evidence to attest to that. The site is part of our leaking underground storage tank program, so any property that had a leaking underground storage tank on it is now considered a site. And a property could be a conglomerate of parcels. One may be a facility, one may be adjacent and contiguous, and they would comprise the property for your redevelopment. And I'll let Dominic take over.
So in addition, kind of like what Brad touched on earlier, to the facility sites, functionally obsolete, historic resources, blighted properties are also included in that. And so, and blighted has a bunch of subcategories on how that qualifies. It can be attractive nuisance to youth, it can be just public safety, something about the property that's going to endanger the general public. It could be that the utilities have just simply been removed. And so getting into the weeds, you're going to want to talk to us, you're going to want to talk to a consultant to kind of figure out how that fits there. Historic resource, typically what you're going to be looking for is, how is that property designated by local, state, or federal agency or commission? Is it a contributing building to a local historic district? And how are you getting the paperwork to justify that? In some cases you have projects where you might be going for other incentives like tax credits or that sort of thing, and so you have to go through a process. And typically you're putting in this paperwork with the Secretary of the Interior, I'm blanking on it, but for application for those tax credits and that sort of thing, so it kind of qualifies and you get that recognition. Also the land bank owned properties as well fit into that, tax reverted properties, those sort of things. So I guess we're going back to Dan for a second.
Yeah, so Brad kind of touched on this, but there are specific activities that are eligible under our program, the BEQ side of the program, and then specific activities that are eligible under the MSF or MEDC side of the Brownfield program. So specifically for us, we can help cover site assessments, like you said, baseline environmental assessments, due care planning. So if anybody doesn't know what due care planning, anytime an owner or operator of a property is working on a property that's a facility that's contaminated, they have what's called due care. And due care is basically the responsibility to make sure that everybody that comes in contact with that property is safe and that the contamination that's on that property is not exacerbated in any way. We can also, alongside MEDC, do demolition, hazardous materials, asbestos, mold, and lead abatement. We can do response activities that would be outside of due care. So if it's not necessarily protecting someone that's going to come on the property, but it's something that you want to do to take care of it. So if you have soil contamination that no one's ever going to touch, but you want to get rid of it, that would be a response activity, not necessarily due care. We can also cover environmental insurance for the developer, as well as interest, as long as the community is willing to allow interest. We will allow it as well.
And so so as you go through a process and you feel like, well, we might get some support through Brownfield Act 381 work plan, you're going to want to talk to both of us. You might not know right away that you need both of us, but it's always in your best interest to start that conversation with both of us. Because we're doing concurrent reviews. We need to know that all bases are covered and we're not missing anything. And so when we look at these types of activities, because for instance, all communities across the state get assistance with demolition and the abatement of lead, asbestos, and mold. Mold being the one that was just added on this last year or so. But there are certain cases where if, let's say, a more immediate need environmentally is being restricted to be, assessed or dealt with, has a structure that's, about to be demolished, well, that would fall under, or we'd have to make a determination whether or not that would fall under the DEQ side of the house. And so it's really important to kind of keep that conversation open and going and involving everybody. Typically when you have a good BRA working with you that's got a lot of experience in this, they'll be able to recognize that kind of early on and help to facilitate those kind of things. Along with that, you have for the qualified local governmental units, which basically back in 2000, the state made recognition of approximately 146 communities that were qualified local governmental units under the Obsolete Property Rehabilitation Act, PA 146, to allow them to capture taxes to address the costs related to these categories. Site preparation, if there's non-environmentally based dewatering of the site, maybe there's some kind of structurally necessary soil improvements that need to happen, then that would fall under that. Infrastructure improvements also, where you're looking at the right-of-way, maybe you're putting in some landscaping that will help with stormwater management. even green stormwater management infrastructure upgrades where you're using pervious, surfaces or bioswales and things like that as an improvement to the property, this overall benefit to the community. Parking structures and underground and integrated parking can also be a part of that infrastructure improvement conversation. So there are a lot of different things, and of course, we also support interests as long as local community, local BRA is on board with that as well.
So we'll start with our discussion of what is Brownfield TIF. So basically, it's that tool that we can use to help developers level the playing field as opposed to developing on a green site that's never been touched. We want to help them infill our communities as opposed to building on top of pristine land. And we basically help them by covering the costs, those extra costs, to facilitate that redevelopment. What we do is use that incremental tax increase, so just that extra tax increase as a result of the development to help pay for those activities.
Yeah, so if you see in this little picture here, that's pre-development initial value. So, the purpose of that is to allow for that local government to still be able to pay for the services and infrastructure needs and fire and police needs of that community, and not necessarily take all the taxes out of their hands, so that there's still some operating capacity, right? So, and that level is frozen. But after completion of project occurs, you have this increase. You're making an improvement on the property values should go up, and you should be able to see that not only with the subject property but those surrounding properties, therefore increasing that even more for that tax increment revenue.
So again, for those people that might need a couple different ways of seeing it, we have this graph which shows that initial value. Say you receive $10 in taxes before a property gets redeveloped. The developer throws in a bunch of money, probably more than the actual value of the property is going to go up. That's generally how it works. But after that developer puts in some money, they say the property tax goes up to $110 a year. So the community is still getting $10 a year, and the developer is getting that extra $100 a year until the developer is repaid. And at the end of that repayment program, the community gets all of that $110 into the future. So now we'll start our little game. And so we asked Brad for some help. So I will play the role of a developer wanting to do a brownfield redevelopment. Dominic's going to play the role of a local unit of government. And so kind of wear a couple different hats. So he'll be the tax assessor as well as the Brownfield Authority. And then Brad gets to play the role of a consultant for once. So yes, you get paid, and you don't have to give any money back. So I have all sorts of money because I'm a developer. And so I just purchased the property, and as part of that purchase, I now owe taxes. So in the first year, my taxes are $1. So I'm going to give $1 to Dominic, the local unit of government, to pay my taxes. And then in working with the BRA and with Dominic, we decide these are the activities that I need to do to redevelop this property. So I have to do some demolition, I have to do my environmental assessment, I have to do some lead and asbestos abatement as part of that demolition, and then I have due care obligations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire Brad to do my environmental assessment. So there's a dollar. And then, did you also do some demolition for me?
I sure did.
Thank you. And how about some lead and asbestos abatement? Yeah. And I just realized that as part of the BEA, I saw that it's really contaminated, so now I have to do care. All right. Thank you. So I just invested all this money into redeveloping this property. So Dominic comes back and tells me next year that my taxes are now $2. I say, okay, well, great. I'm just giving money away. But as a result of my investment, the increment is $1. So Dominic gives that back to me. Then he comes back to me in 2 years and says, $2. There you go. But I get $1 back. So I'm still down, but not quite. 3 years down the road, tax bill, $2. But turn around again, $1 back. 4th year, think I'm about close, $2. And $1 back. So you can see that Dominic's still holding money to make all the necessary, like he said, services whole. You're not taking pencils away from kids. Everybody's made whole, especially when you're using state TIF. State school taxes are made whole by the general fund, or by the state school aid fund. So everybody, the per pupil amount doesn't go down, nothing changes. Your schools are still getting all the money that they would be getting anyway. And then finally, I have all my money back, but I still owe taxes. So in year 5, I give them $2. In year 6, I give them $2. And it goes on and on and on until I don't own the property anymore or somebody buys it. So I hope that helps explain it a little bit better. Does anybody have any questions specifically about TIF?
Does Brad get to keep all of his money?
Brad gets to keep all of his money. That's the world.
Going to lunch later.
Yeah, it's the world that consultants live in. They make all the money. Yes, sir.
Yes, a local government jurisdiction has an voted increase in millage for financing. Is that exempt because of the TIF, or do they start paying on that? I know the schools get sinking funds. I know Kegel went through and got 4 mills for police. Somebody else got 3 mills for fire. So is that captured from you, or is that exempt until the TIF is paid?
Right. There are no millages are exempt except for ones that are already exempted by legislation. So the question was, are millages, like new millages, exempt from capture? The answer is no. There are exemptions for Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne County for the DIA millage and the zoo millage. Any debt millages are exempt from capture. So if you have like a specific bond debt that you need to pay down, that's exempt from capture. But everything else is capturable, and people cannot opt out. It's not, you can't just say, well, I don't want my taxes captured, I'm going to opt out. It doesn't work that way. That's why they hold public hearings. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, that's why we hold a public hearing as part of the Brownfield, improvement of Brownfield plan. Our last stage through the Brownfield Authority, after it passes 2 resolutions from the local unit of government, it goes through our BRA, it goes through our Board of Commissioners subcommittees. We go to the EDCA, Economic Development, Community Affairs, and Finance subcommittees. But then it goes to our full Board of Commissioners. Before the Board of Commissioners actually vote and approve the Brownfield plan, we hold a public hearing. So at that point, if there's any issues with any tax mills being captured, we welcome those individuals or entities to come and speak their piece on that topic, as far as them not wanting to get the taxes captured. So far, in all the projects Oakland County BRA has done, we've had 0 issues with anybody wanting to try to opt out. But once we approve it at local unit, all mills are being collected.
Thank you. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Question, so what if you've already promised villages through other abatements before you go through the Brownfield? Are those villages not available for TIF?
That would be correct. So the question was, what if you've already promised other abatements? So are you talking about like DDAs or other TIF districts?
Commercial rehab.
Right. Yeah, so those would not be available for capture until after that runs out.
Okay, thank you.
We actually have, I think, 1 or 2 examples where we had 198 in place. So you'll see a split. It basically just stretches out the Brownfield payback period for the developer. So there's still taxes that aren't being captured by the 198 or 210 be given to the authorities, the Brownfield authorities, the second claim. So they're still getting something, but it just stretches out the payback period for the developer.
Just one comment. So That's gonna affect your local capture. It does not affect the state, does it, or sometimes it does, I think, and sometimes it doesn't.
I think when they is half.
Yeah, and
Half the states.
maybe the 210 or others don't. So, kind of yes and no.
Right. And to kind of follow up on that, like as part of, like Brad mentioned earlier, like if there are other TIF districts that already exist, so your redevelopment is also in your downtown development authority. The downtown development authority has the first right of refusal for those taxes. And what you usually try to do is try to ask them to forego that TIF for that period, allow the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority to capture that TIF and then repay the developer. Any other specific questions about TIF? So some of the abilities of a BRA, like Brad mentioned, they approve the brownfield plans and the TIF reimbursement requests. And then it goes on to the local unit of government, so either the city council, village township board, or the county board of commissioners, county case. They can authorize that tax increment revenue capture. They can set durations. So you can say, even though a reimbursement can be eligible for 30 years, they can ask that, we're gonna limit it to 15 years. If you get paid back in 15 years, great. If you don't, sorry, you get a little bit back, but not all of it. They can also apply for our grant and loan programs. And they can also establish that local brownfield redevelopment fund. So our incentives and funding, specifically, outside of that tax increment financing method, we have a grant and loan program. It was initially called the Clean Michigan Initiative Grant and Loan Program. It was a bond, I think $600 million in 1998. We had a pot of money to offer grants and loans for brownfield redevelopment. Last year we got another $5 million to do that work because our money had run out from the Clean Michigan Initiative. And this year, starting October 1, we're hoping to have more money. So we think about $4 or $5 million. One of the stipulations last year was that we needed to spend it, and we did. We spent it in about 8 months. I think we actually got the funding in February, and all contracts need to be signed by next Tuesday, and they will be. So all that money will be out the door, contracts signed. Those activities kind of align with Act 381, the tax increment financing, so we can help pay for specific site assessments. We can help pay for that due care activity, those response activities. We can even help local units of government that might be liable for that contamination. So if you think about like a DPW yard that might have had a leaking underground storage tank or something of that nature, we can help those local units of government with a 50% match on the loan. That's actually a pretty good program. We haven't really used that much yet. We also offer grants and loans through our refined petroleum fund. That's every time you go fill up your car with gasoline, we get a little bit of money. We have $5 million a year specifically for gas stations and other sites that would have refined petroleum storage tank. And we can basically, there are two ways we can do that. Either the DEQ can go out and do the work and then give you back the property, or we can offer a grant to the community for the community to hire, or the developer to hire a consultant and somebody to go out there and do that cleanup work. Pull those underground storage tanks, clean up the soil and groundwater around it, and get that property ready for redevelopment. I also mentioned we can do grants for site assessments, but we have a brand new program specifically for site assessments on properties where we don't know if there's contamination, or we know there's some there, but we really don't know the extent. This is a program where we will actually go out and do the work. We will hire a contractor to do phase 1. Then we will go out, based upon that phase 1, we will go out as the DEQ and do that phase 2 site investigation work. Get all that information back. That same contractor will then write the BEA for the developer, and then basically we would submit it to us on your behalf. That's a great program. It's brand new. We're still working on how everybody applies for that. So if you have thoughts about a property, let me know, and I'll get you on the list, because I think once we have an idea of how we're going to decide upon those, it's going to move pretty quickly.
So for the MEDC and basically the non-environmental activities involved, we have other funding as well that, but there's non-environmental, you can use that TIF. We also have these other incentives and funding that you can use for your redevelopment projects, or in some cases smaller public projects. I guess one of the important things too is that when you think about your project or what site you're dealing with, also consider the fact that we have the community development side and the business development side. And that even business development projects, like the last slide that we had, that Tri-County Commerce Center was supported by our business development team using Brownfield TIF. So, but in conjunction with, and sometimes maybe not so much, depending on how we evaluate the projects, we'll take a look and see if maybe we can stack these incentives with Brownfield TIF or Act 381 work plan, or maybe just switch over and say this is how we're going to participate in that. So the first one being this, the Michigan Community Revitalization Program, basically the state grant and loan program, where we typically have grants for up to $750,000 or loans up to $10 million, depending on whether that's 20% of eligible investment. So not total development costs, but eligible investment. That is in order to be a gap financing tool for projects. So if, and those eligible investments include the hard construction costs, carpentry, bricks and mortar, the windows, doors, HVAC, plumbing, but also soft costs like architecture, engineering, environmental assessment costs, and surveying, and some of those things. Again, specifics can be gleaned from us if you have a specific project. But we have stacked CRP probably more than any other incentive with Brownfield TIF. So they do work together. Some of the costs can cross programs, and so your consultant or the BRA or one of us should be able to recognize where that is, and that can change a conversation about what you really, the benefits of those programs are giving you. Again, the business development program, is through our business development managers. They're, engaging with companies that they have a lot of accounts, but it's never a bad thing to give them a call and say, hey, what can we do for this property? This company wants to move in. They can incent on the amount of jobs that are going to be, I think, brought into this new development. And then for nonprofits and local government, we have the Public Spaces Community Places program, which you may or may not weave into this conversation, but you never know. And basically what that is, it's a crowdfunding grant that we do with Detroit-based platform Patronicity, where we will match dollar for dollar up to $50,000 on activities that are basically reactivating or activating public space for the public good. So for instance, many communities have done trailhead parks. They've done farmers market pavilions. They've done alleyway improvements for gallery space or event space. We've had schools for reintroducing old trades like blacksmithing and that sort of stuff. And so it's a really easy and pretty flexible program that can get some, ground floor energy going, bring recognition to a certain area in your community that might actually lead to another project that, these other programs, including Brownfield TIP, can be applied to.
So Brad kind of went over all of the EPA grants available. If you have a question, let me know. I think one of the, I don't know if you mentioned it or not, but those are on a pretty particular schedule. So it's a good idea to get a hold of that schedule, find out when they're accepting applications, then they go through the review, and then they go through the determination, and when you would actually get the award. So it's a good idea to get a hold of that schedule, because if you have a property that's like itching for redevelopment right away, EPA grant is probably not the way to go.
Yeah, just to touch on that, I don't have, like I said previously, I don't have any experience with site specific, but for our assessment grant for our coalition, we usually apply roughly November timeframe, and we don't find out if we receive any money until the following April or May. So there's a little lag time there. And then from that point, we have to do an agreement with the US EPA. So we really don't receive any money to have to give out to developers until roughly October 1, November. So it's basically like a year-long process from actually applying for the funds and to receiving and actually be able to give out grants.
And so, somebody previously mentioned, or we mentioned before about tax abatements and those kinds of mechanisms. Here's some examples of them. These are, these are legislatively created tax mechanisms, typically going through the tax commission, that sort of thing. And our office, we have our staff kind of divided up amongst ourselves a lot of those types of tools that you can use, so that we can provide some kind of entry-level information about who you should be talking to and what they look like as you apply them to projects. But you really want to be able to explore these things with local counsel as it pertains to the way that your local government works, because it's going to be driven from that ground, from your office on up at that point. Like I said, we can give you some baseline information, who to talk to, forms, that sort of stuff. But work with your people locally. I think the important thing here too is, and this goes along with the historic tax credits, where you can actually get, as a part of that eligibility, if you have a historic asset, you can go through a process where you get historic tax credits, where you can sell those in order to get equity to throw in the deal to help with the project. You really want to not just talk to us for kind of guidance early on, but all of us, everybody that you can think of, even if you're reaching out to one of us, we will probably say, well, did you think about this person, that person, this person, that person? You want to get everybody in the room that you possibly can to talk about a project, because you don't know where that assistance is going to come from. You may think one thing and it turns out to be 5 other things. And so I cannot stress enough that landowner or developer, if they're the same, local government, state agencies, nonprofits, foundations, whoever you think would even have a stake or interest in a project is important. It's important. What's that? County. County, sorry. Yes, county, please. And get them on board, and not just county, but your local VRA especially, right? So when you're talking about brownfields, and historic tax credits, that's one thing when they hear about it, and they think, oh, that'd be really great to be able to use this, to generate this equity, the cash to throw into the project. But in a lot of cases, it's there's a really high threshold for that, because you go through financial and legal processes in order to fill out the paperwork, to submit to get those tax credits. it can be costly, and so you're going to be, you're going to want to do that cost-benefit analysis with somebody to say, is it really worth my while to kind of chase after those tax credits? And then you got to find somebody to help, syndicate or find a way to sell those tax credits so that you actually get the money to throw into the project. So it can be pretty intense and complex process. In some cases, works out really well. So.
Yeah, I would just want to echo one thing that Dominic said about getting us involved. I think you also want to try to get us involved as early as possible, because some of these things do take time. Our grants and loans take 2 to 3 months from a project proposal to a signed contract, and then that needs to be followed up by an approved work plan. So getting us involved early helps a lot, and that goes with the Act 381 tax increment financing as well. We see a draft, or when we see an Act 381 work plan for the first time, and it's an official work plan, if we have questions about it, there's no opportunity, there's a lot less of an opportunity for us to offer comments. If we can see a draft work plan, while they're working on approving the Brownfield plan, that allows us to address comments early. And so as soon as the Brownfield plan is approved, we can get that work plan. We've already seen it, we've already made our comments to it. We can get that back and approved in a much quicker fashion than we could have if it's the first time that we're seeing it. So hopefully this video works. They're already up there.
Brownfields, we've all seen them. The abandoned gas station on the corner, the vacant, contaminated industrial site. This video series is about the partnerships that make brownfield redevelopment possible. This is Brownfield Flip.
So the renaissance that's happened in Lansing in maybe the last decade has been pretty extraordinary. If you were to have come to Lansing in 2006, which is when we actually started planning the Accident Fund project, you would have found a building that was in pretty dismal shape, and nothing was happening along the riverfront. Cities all across the Midwest are sort of littered with examples of bad design and bad urban planning that happened on rivers, because for 100 years the river was the back of the city, and now rivers have become the front of cities.
The power station was abandoned on our skyline in downtown Lansing. It was with a huge smokestack on it, coal piles. It was really symbolic of the old Lansing thinking, what we couldn't do, what was impossible. Could we redevelop a power station on a riverfront? Could little Lansing do something like that? And in the past, our answer was, no, we can't possibly take on something like that. But with the DEQ, with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Accident Fund, the Crispin Company, we were able to put together a public-private partnership that said, yes, we can.
So the building was a great canvas. It was actually one of Accident Fund's executives who suggested it. It was a contaminated site, and we were able to clean that up, and that was also with DEQ and EPA funds. It had a chiller plant that had existed there for about 20 years that needed to be moved, and it was with Brownfield TIF funds that we were able to do that. If it felt gray before, I think it's a vibrant palette of colors now, and it's a great tool for recruiting folks in our industry who want to be downtown, want to be in neat places, don't necessarily want to be in sort of bland, suburban, vanilla office buildings.
It wasn't good enough just to have a profound building rehabilitated for them. They wanted a place that would attract talent from all around the globe to their building. So it was critical for them to preserve and rehab this beautiful power station here in our riverfront in the heart of downtown, but also due to the DEQ's work, not only clean the site, but also with $3.1 million of waterfront development monies through the DEQ, which was to work on the riverfront development. And all of it has added up now to where we have 1,000+ residents living in the immediate area, and it's become a bustling neighborhood. And I'm telling anybody who will listen that economic development is fundamentally about helping people. And people count on economic development every day as a sign of progress and hope for the state of Michigan that somebody is doing something to make a place better for us all.
And that's really a good example of why this was such a strong partnership, because every person on this team pulled in the same direction for the same purpose as hard as they could, and that's really the only way you can have something like this work. This was truly a life-changing project and a city-changing project, and for Accident Fund and for the City of Lansing and for the Board of Water and Light and for the DEQ as a showcase, you know, it was just fantastic.
Can you imagine downtown Lansing today if the power station were still abandoned and none of these buildings were here today? And DEQ grants were absolutely critical in creating hundreds and hundreds of jobs in the core downtown area that wouldn't have existed otherwise today. They'd be out of state. And by the way, there's even more planned, there's more buildings going up. So more jobs, more people living in downtown. This is talent that our corporations is trying to recruit. Cleanup, very profound. Our river is better off because of all the good brownfield work, the cleanup activities that have taken place. It's enjoyed by everybody in the community. It's a thriving neighborhood now, whereas before it was quite literally nothing.
Hi, I'm Susan Wenslick, a Brownfield coordinator with the Department of Environmental Quality. If you enjoyed hearing about this Brownfield project, you can learn more about this and other Brownfield success stories on our website. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for another episode of Brownfield Flip.
Saw that there's, I think, 6 additional videos that you can watch that are just different areas. I think we have one in Traverse City. I think we have one up in or down in Harbor Shores. There's one on the Detroit riverfront, and we're still working on more. So they're going to continue to populate that YouTube page. So as a plug, please go watch the other videos. Every hit counts.
What about Oakland County?
We're going to work on it. And so we have one more video, and this is just a different style project.
But in order to achieve certain things, you have to create technology that hasn't existed. I think basically it's telling people that we are open for business. The city of Detroit's open for business, the state is open for business.
We are happy to announce today that we have approved financial assistance for ferrous metal processing through our Michigan Business Development Program and Brownfield Redevelopment Program to redevelop a severely contaminated site in the city of Gibraltar.
And what this line does, it takes conventional steel, commercial quality steel, and significantly increases the strength so that we can start making vehicle parts out of lighter weight steels.
The building itself has tremendous potential, but it also has the environmental concerns, which I think has frightened people away. By the MEDC, the DEQ stepping up and saying we're willing to help clean that up, I think that eliminated a huge hurdle.
This project is a perfect example of collaboration between various agencies, including the City of Gibraltar, Wayne County, Port of Detroit, DEQ, MDOT, and MEDC.
Of all the things I've done, aside from starting ferrous metal processing or Farragon Corporation in '83, this is the most exciting job I've ever done. This is really, really exciting for me personally.
Without the involvement of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and the Department of Environmental Quality, this project would never happen. I mean, that's just a fact.
All right, so we kind of want to cover one specific case study for you all. But one thing I wanted to tie into that last video, they mentioned that not only did DEQ and MEDC participate on that project, but also MDOT. So Dominic and I get together with our other Region 10 counterparts and all the other state agencies. I think we do it quarterly, sometimes more often. We're meeting next week up in Lansing. But so we get together all the time to talk about our projects. So if you have a project that might have, you know, say a trailhead, we would talk to our counterpart in the DNR to see if there's anything that they could do to help out. If there's a food aspect to it, that includes like breweries, we talk to our counterpart at MDAR to see if there's something that she could do to help with that particular project also. We said MDOT, we sit with Treasury, somebody I'm forgetting. Trying to think, going around the room. Yeah, we've had USDA come sit down and talk with us as well.
Federal
Yeah.
partners.
So just know that, that we can help you tie into other aspects of a project as well, which is very helpful. So this is an interesting project called the Iron Ridge Redevelopment. I don't know, you might see a tall building with like a, copper or bronze cap on top of it, right at like Bermuda Road off of 696. Used to be, E-Prize was there for a little while before they moved, but anyway, it actually encompasses two municipalities. It's in the city of Ferndale, and it's also in the city of Pleasant Ridge. 21 parcels in total.
Yeah, so this is a very kind of diverse development. There were a lot of different businesses interested in being there. There were actually current businesses that decided to stay there, and so as you can see, we're looking at pretty high level of private investment for these two communities to be involved in. Really nice numbers as far as jobs and wage. There was kind of your technical professionals and some other things, the beer brewery staff, and there's kind of this overall campus feel to this property. With some selective demolition, really brought 225,000 square feet of impacted property is being redeveloped into this great kind of multi-use place where it's a destination. Really is going to have, and has already had an impact on Ferndale and Pleasant Ridge. And so, in various complex aspects, two different communities, working, with Brad and the consultants and the development team, two different local staffs. It really kind of entailed a lot of different facets that we were, working on, and I don't know, just a really fantastic project. Just not your typical type of thing. So I guess that when we talking about things early on and what you would never expect could happen can come from those early conversations. So we want to encourage that as well.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that it's not just great for those two communities, it is, but it also helps the surrounding area. It kind of tied together Ferndale, Pleasant Ridge, and even Royal Oak to an extent. It connected bike paths. It's just a really great destination, and some people will argue about increased competition, but I think more people in an area is better for everybody. It's not going to hurt anyone. So specifically, this was a pretty contaminated property. It was right off of a railroad line, and anytime you find property off of a rail line, you're going to find contamination. There were high amounts of PCBs, and everybody knows what PCBs are, pretty bad stuff. It's actually regulated under the Toxic Substances Control Act by EPA. So we had to, getting in early was helpful because we identified PCB contamination. I was able to work with the consultant for the project to identify that they needed to work through EPA. They needed to get EPA approval for their work plan to remove that PCB before we could actually sign off on it. So they did that prior to submitting their work plan to us. But they did a lot of environmental investigation, as they had to. That big of a site. Most of those buildings, the exception of the tall office building, were part of a former wire manufacturer. So all the things that go into like making, stretching, coating metal wire were there. So they had these huge pits like you see on the picture, some of them with sludge in the bottom of it. You could walk around and see old drums, signs on the wall that said acid, corrosive, all, everything that you would want or never want to see in your property. But those signs that within that phase one, you would say, okay, that's You know, that's a REC, that's a recognized environmental concern that we have to investigate. So they went ahead and they did all that investigation. Obviously, those old buildings, they did an asbestos survey. I believe they also did a lead survey. They looked for mold. It wasn't too bad on the mold front, but they had a lot of due care to talk about. They had to remove that PCB contaminated soil, which a lot of it, I think over $1 million of that $3 million in total environmental cost was specifically for the PCB removal. They had to put in a vapor barrier for those newer buildings. I think close to $1 million for the vapor barrier as well. Obviously managing groundwater while they're doing that soil remediation. And then just maintaining oversight, so that we help them cover all of that oversight throughout the project, and then their confirmation sampling. So whenever you're doing an excavation, you need to kind of sample as you go to make sure you're getting it all. So like if you dig that hole, you sample the wall and the floor of that hole to make sure that you got it all, it's all gone. So like I said, over $3 million in total environmental costs for that entire project. State covered about 1.3, and the locals covered about 1.7. You can see a lot of that was in Pleasant Ridge, and that's where the majority of that PCB contamination was. An entire parking lot had to be ripped up, dug out, and replaced, as well as some areas in the basements of the buildings and in between those buildings.
And so, in conjunction with the environmental, the non-environmental had, heavy infrastructure improvements piece to it. Some of those things being shown here. There was some selective demolition that happened. Planning and things like that about how to do that, the engineering that goes into that, was a part of this project, asbestos abatement. And across the two jurisdictions, mostly that coming out of the local contribution of that tip, ours being that 3.5 out of the non-environmental. There's some parking, the landscaping, that went along with that to kind of prepare that site, to allow for additional units of the apartments. There's approximately 75 units going in. So that's basically that side of the fence, so to speak, storm sewers and water mains, things that you would think of more so on a public infrastructure realm, but then some other things like lighting and that were also included there.
And I'll just reiterate kind of that it wasn't really a fun site to walk around in before we got to it. And so adding that public infrastructure, the park areas, a lot of curb cuts and stuff like that needed to happen. And those apartments that he's mentioning are actually kind of across the street from the campus. So you wanted them to feel like they were a part of that campus. So that public infrastructure kind of tied those two parts of the area together. So I think that's all we have for you right now. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, please.
You said about cleaning up the PCBs. You said that you guys go and dig up, like the cement and whatever else. My thing is, I know with us having in contact, having a gym here for however years, like the lakes, they said they clean up the PCBs in the lakes. My understanding is that with that type of, cleanup, you can't really get rid of all of the PCBs. So you're telling me that with that project, you got
Right, so the question was, can you really actually get rid of all the PCBs? She brought up an example, Harrison Lake, where in Pontiac, we're dealing with PCBs in the water is a lot different than dealing with PCBs in the soil. You can remove PCB contaminated sediment from water, but really your target is to get below a certain level. Obviously, like getting to a level where it's non-detect because it's, especially in the water where it's constantly moving, you have sediments that move from one place to another. That's a pretty tricky activity to kind of do it underwater. In the soil, it's a little bit easier, but again, you're going for a level below a certain level to where it's no longer a toxic substance, and then you're pretty much capping it. So you're putting clean fill back on top and then a parking lot that you have to maintain as part of your due care obligations. Good question. Anybody else? We'll start over here.
You have the acreage for the Iron Ridge development?
Yeah, I think it was 17, I would say?
13 acres.
13? Okay, thank you.
A lot of these things, it sounds like there are already developers lined up and come to you all and say, hey, we bought this, it looks bad, it doesn't help. Are there more ways that municipalities can get involved proactively and help a property owner? Like, hey, you can work with the DEQ and the MDC to get some things lined up to help people market such property to say, hey, Brownfield can be an option, and here's a preliminary assessment, things like that.
Yeah, definitely. So the question was asking it, if you don't have a developer lined up, are there things that municipalities can do to help get these properties ready or help current property owners? So I'll take kind of the environmental side. Definitely yes. As a municipality, you are our clients. In our Brownfield Grant and Loan Program, the developers are your clients. So we want to help you market your properties, get them ready for redevelopment. So part of our site assessment program could be tailored to a local unit of government to kind of understand, okay, I have this vacant property, it might be contaminated, it might not. Can we get some funds to find out what's there? Maybe it's one where we go out and do the work, or maybe it's one where we give you $50,000 to hire somebody to do the work. We can do the same thing with our loan program, although with a loan program you really want to make sure you have a developer lined up and an actual development that's going to reap some benefit as far as tax increment goes, because generally tax increment is what is used to repay that loan after or when it comes due. I'll let Dominic take the rest of that.
So I guess from our agency, we encourage communities to engage in our Redevelopment Ready Communities program. And at the county, the One Stop Ready and the efforts that are done here to kind of identify where those places are in your community that you feel like are your problem children properties, and there are best practices, there are steps, there are ways that you can use the county and the state to give you some guidance on where to start, how to package properties, and go through, identifying and putting, maybe getting some ideas from those staff that I mentioned about what are the possibilities. Could you get something from a utility that could help you fund something or whatever, and put together some ideas like kind of early on about what it would take maybe to do that, so that if somebody does, or you could proactively go out there, and through our Redevelopment Ready Communities program, we have means that we actually help communities promote particular properties, so that there is more of a national, not just local or regional, attention to that, so that you can get it in the hands of the private sector. They can fund the heavy lift of redeveloping that property, and then get maybe reimbursed through a program like we had mentioned earlier, so.
And to go along with that, with Redevelopment Ready, Oakland County's One Stop Ready Community Showcase. If you have a property that you're interested in showcasing, go along. If you work with the EPA already and you already know what exactly is on the site, or you know it's a brownfield and the community is willing to look at a brownfield, you can put that in the literature and take it to our One Stop Ready Community Showcase. I think we've had a good showing in the past as far as potential brownfield projects in other communities that were at the showcase, so that's another avenue you can take.
Any other questions?
Is it possible to cover up contamination with what we told that with the Hayes Jones project, that how they clean up the contamination with 12 inches of dirt? Is that possible?
Yeah, so under the current legislation, a property owner has due care obligations. So they don't necessarily have to clean something up if they can make sure that anybody who comes in contact with it is protected. So, and it varies site by site, but yes, so like 12 inches of clean fill and a tennis court on top of contamination is most likely preventing somebody from coming into contact with it, and therefore it would be safe to use. But really that's the nature of the statute allows for just safe reusal of a property, not necessarily cleaning it up, although we do allow for going above and beyond. So if somebody wanted to say, well, I know I only have to put 12 inches of topsoil down and keep my tennis court in good shape, I want to get rid of it. And if they want to get rid of it, we will help them pay to get rid of it, as long as the community is on board with that as well. I mean, because it's definitely going to cost a little bit more money. So sometimes it's the lowest cost alternative, but other times it's let's spend the money, let's get rid of it, then we don't have to worry about it again. Any other questions?
And we'll have more time for questions. We're going to go over a couple more case studies. We put together a progress report. So I'll go over 4 or 5. One of the projects was the Iron Ridge project, so I won't have to go over that. No, that's fine. And we'll have these progress reports at the back of the room. Hey, Scott?
Yeah.
Are the progress reports in the back? Okay. When you're exited, if you want to copy one of these progress reports.
Don't get them yet. Brad will let them talk about it.
What's that?
So don't get them yet. You let them talk about it.
Yeah, don't get them yet. So we put together, our OCBRA was interested. We knew we had a number of projects that were very successful in the past 3 years. So one of our board members suggested that we put together a report. We took it to our marketing team. They ran with it. And so we got a 3-year Brownfield Redevelopment Authority progress report out of it. So with this, it says 8 projects. I won't bore you with all 8 of them. I'll just touch on a few of them. But 8 projects that passed through Oakland County PRA resulted in more than $270 million in overall investment for our communities. With a projected job growth or new jobs of 1,900, $45 million in increased taxable value for local communities, and more than 300 acres of contaminated land cleaned up and repurposed. We asked Brooks to be here, and so here he is. He's a very busy schedule, but the quote that he had for shines light onto the Brownfield program. The Brownfield program ensures the development of sustainable communities through remediation and reinvestment in contaminated and abandoned properties. By partnering with private investors, our communities increase their tax base, facilitate job growth, and utilize existing infrastructure, breathing new life back into the areas that were unusable. Pete Webster is our chair of the OCBRA. He has a welcoming message in the book. One thing I want to touch in, he goes over the same numbers I did, the 270 million, 1,900 expected new jobs. but he focused on the 300 acres of cleaned up land. He compared it to the size of Springfield Oaks. So if you think about that, if you ever been to Springfield Oaks, the size of that park is basically the amount of land that was cleaned up and or repurposed through the Oakland County BRA in the last 3 years. Here's our board of directors, and we're fortunate enough to have one of our board of directors here today, Mr. Dan Hunter, who's the deputy director of the Oakland County EDCA. I put this up here because it shows OCBRA's board is very knowledgeable. So if you have a project that comes to us, trust me when we vet the project very well through our OCBRA. You might recognize some of these names up here. There's counting 4 lawyers on our board, so it can be the conversation can get pretty lengthy. But we do a great job of vetting all the projects, and we have well over 100 years of experience with the Brownfield program and the BRAs. So if you have any reservation as far as going to the Oakland County's BRA for help with a project, don't have any, because I believe we have one of the best BRAs in the state of Michigan, and I'll stand by that. Here's our first little case study here. This the Pontiac Challenge Manufacturing. It's on a former GM property at Center Point Parkway. It's 45 acres. It's an overall investment of $52 million. It created 400 full-time jobs. It created a 450,000 square foot manufacturing industrial building. So you look at the tax base before, it was $306,390. Again, GM was on the site before, so the tax base was pretty substantial. So that money tax base is still going to communities, as Dominic and Dan showed you in their game. So that money is still going to the city of Pontiac. The increased tax value doesn't look like that high for considering it's $52.5 million investment. The new tax base is $592,000 to date. But the reason was because of that. I must have an old PowerPoint uploaded.
No, hit the button, you got an animation.
I did.
Right there.
No, it's one before that. I updated it. Thanks, Ryan. But there was a little animation that popped up here. This is one of the projects I mentioned earlier. Had a PA 198, so that's why the tax base isn't as high as it should be, because there's a PA 198 in conjunction with the Brownfield capture. So the numbers up top that floated up at the top is what the MEDC and MDEQ approved. Again, that's what the overall investment that TIF they approved, and that's broken down between state and local. So when you see that number, MEDC approved $2.9 million. That's on all school taxes. It's broken down between local and school taxes. And so that's what this is what we're looking at today. The Pontiac Automation and Assembly, which is basically challenge manufacturing. That's what the building looks like currently. Next one is M1 Concourse. This, I'm sure a number of you probably passed it on the way here this morning. This property was on a former GM site, a Racer Trust site, but this property dates back to 1909 for manufacturing of automobiles. So you know by the history that there's probably some serious contamination that went on that site. Racer Trust did a good job as far as working with the community, working with the developer. Racer Trust was obligated to clean up some of the portions of the property, but there was also some other things that need to be done by the developer. So $43 million investment to date. They're still working on phase 2, phase 3. They're still building more car condominiums. They still have a plan to redevelop that corner into a mixed use, probably more commercial and offices on that corner, but they are still working on it. 200,000 square feet of industrial building for 192 car condominiums. And they're currently building more, so that number's gonna go up. Not much of a job creator per se, only 12 full-time jobs created for that, but the spin-off with development, we see it with people purchasing the property along Woodward. There's a great amount of spin-off coming from this M1 Concourse. Tax base before was $412,000. New tax base, almost $11.5 million in increased taxable value for the community. Eligible activity is in the Brownfield plan was $14.7 million. And again, here's what the MEDC and MDEQ approved, just under $8 million from the MEDC and just over $5 million for MDEQ. again, split between local and school taxes. Dan's Excavating. This is one of our projects that's local only, so we didn't go to the state for additional funding. A lot of times developers are go, and they don't see the greater benefit. In this case, I believe the payback is $424,000 in eligible activity. So they thought they'd capture that pretty quickly through local only. And I don't even know if this would have, DEQ probably would have qualified, I'm not positive on that, but I don't think MEDC wouldn't have qualified as one of their projects. So this is a local only project, so they're being reimbursed from just the local tax dollars. So in that case, it goes through our BRA and the local city, village, or township boards and through our Board of Commissioners process. And once it goes through our Board of Commissioners process and gets approved, we're eligible to capture local only taxes to reimburse the developer. So I just want to put this one here and show you that you don't have to go through the 381 work plan for schools taxes as well. So here's what the building looks like. Something exciting about this parcel, they just bought, this is for Dan's Excavating, they built a 13,000 square foot building, so they only need a small portion of land. And exciting thing about this is, old PowerPoint. There's possible for phase 2, which would be light industrial manufacturing, an industrial park, basically. There's enough land to do an industrial park for more buildings, so that may be phase 2, phase 3 down the line. But right now, it's still a tax generator, created 35 jobs for the city of Pontiac. In the city of Pontiac, you see the tax base went up $230,000. And some of you might have passed this on the way in if you came in from the east. This is the new project for George W. Aug Construction Company. The Pontiac, City of Pontiac likes to call it the East Gateway into the city. This was, again, a GM Racer Trust property. There's many issues with this. One of the main issues was with building it is there's a actual culvert in the middle of the, bisecting the property, which the Clinton River goes through. So they had to work around that with their designs of the building in order to not have to deal with that issue. But it's a beautiful building. They just had their ribbon cutting last month, I believe. MEDC approved $2.3 million, and DEQ approved $600,000 for the. And that's pretty. It's a rendering, but the building looks pretty much exactly how it is there. So 10 jobs created. And George W. Aug was a construction company that was based in the city of Pontiac. They wanted to stay in the city of Pontiac, but they were outgrowing their current facilities, and they wanted. Their employees wanted, and they listened to their employees, they wanted more of an urban walking community so they can go out at lunch to restaurants and whatever. So they decided to stay in the city of Pontiac. They knew all the issues going into it. They worked with Racer Trust, they worked with Oakland County, they worked with the state. We all worked very closely together in order to get this project completed. So it says only created 10 jobs, but they basically just transferred their jobs from the existing facility and brought them over and created 10 more jobs. New tax base is $1.3 million on a tax base. The original tax base was $20,000. So you can see the huge incremental increase there. They got approved for $3.6 million in alcohol activities in their Brownfield plan. Revor Metals, there's an exciting stretch on South Boulevard in the city of Pontiac where it's really completely renovated. From M1 Concourse across from Woodward, but then you go across Woodward, you have United Shore that just opened their new building, world headquarters, and across from United Shore is Revor. A little bit down the street is Williams International. That went into the old movie studio building. In between there is a large office building that ICP purchased and has filled out with a number of different entities. Ultimate Soccer's there. So this corridor has gone through a major transformation in the last few years, and a lot of it is due to brownfield activity. So that might be a case study in the future, just studying that corridor and how much improvement has been made on that corridor through the brownfield program. So Revor Metals, MEDC is the only one who was on this project. MEDQ was not, so the MEDC approved $750,000 in funding. It's a $6 million investment. This property was, to say it was blighted is probably the understatement of the year. It was just in poor condition. So Revolving came in, they cleaned it up pretty well. They used the existing building, and they do have plans for phase 2 and phase 3 to build 2 more buildings on the site. So their tax base, the tax base going into it was $234,000, and it went up to $1.9 million projected when their whole project is completed. So that is that project in Iron Ridge, which Dan and Dominic did a good job discussing. So our numbers are actually the same too, which is always good. But yeah, they already talked about that. So I will leave it at that and open up to any questions if we have any. Just one in the back.
Do you have any parcel size limitations?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any parcel size limitations, like is it possibly too small or?
No, the question was, is there any parcel size limitations to the Brownfield program? The answer is no. We see, you're talking about old gas stations. You're very small pieces of land. A lot of times we'll see, well, that's where the adjacent and contiguous property comes in, piece the properties together, because you can't really build over the old gas stations were because it's too small. But no, doesn't matter the size or scope. If it's a brownfield, it's a brownfield.
Brad and Dan and Dominic, will you guys be around for a couple more minutes if there's questions afterward? Thank you all for coming. It was meant to be an overview. I know 2-hour overview is kind of long, but it was really meant to prompt questions. On the flyer are all of their contact information. So our real goal is to have you guys think of project ideas and get in touch with these three to pursue these resources. The other thing on the back of the flyer is Ryan Dividak's contact information, and if you're an Oakland County community that's interested in participating in our property showcase on November 2nd, please give Ryan a call or an email. Dan, anything else? Dan Hunter is my boss. Dan is the Deputy Director over Planning, Economic Development, Marketing, Finance, Workforce Development, Community Home Improvement, and
CIA's Core Improvement Authority.
and all of our well-being also. So
Thank you, Brad. No, I just want to thank three gentlemen for taking the time. As they probably mentioned earlier, four of us met on a project yesterday afternoon. A very exciting project. So thanks for kind of sharing your wisdom and openness and willingness to help out. Really good stuff. So thank you.
thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, gentlemen, and Brad for speaking today. All right.